3 weeks before a billionaire mysteriously disappeared, his own maid overheard a conversation that was never meant to be heard. A whisper, a plan, and two people he trusted the most plotting his end. In a mansion where silence was part of the luxury, secrets moved louder than footsteps. He was a powerful billionaire, respected, feared, untouchable. His wife lived a life most could only dream of, and his lawyer was the man he trusted with everything. But behind closed doors, something darker was unfolding. An affair, a betrayal, and a plan so cold, it could destroy an empire overnight. They thought they were alone. They thought no one would ever know. But they forgot about the one person who saw everything, the maid. Before we step deeper into this story, I want to know, where are you listening from right now? Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. And if you enjoy suspenseful stories like this, stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and shocking twists, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. Now let's dive in. In a mansion where silence was part of the luxury, secrets moved louder than footsteps. The Wellington estate stood on a quiet stretch overlooking the water, a place where glass walls reflected golden sunsets and polished floors echoed only the softest sounds. It was the kind of home built not just with wealth, but with power, every corner designed to remind you that the man who owned it controlled more than just money. David Wellington, at 48, was a man who had built his empire from instinct, precision, and an unshakable belief that trust was a currency more valuable than gold. Tall, composed, and always impeccably dressed, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. But even the most powerful men had blind spots, and David's was his home. Helena Wellington moved through the mansion like a shadow dressed in elegance. At 38, she possessed a beauty that didn't just turn heads, it held attention. There was something calculated in her calmness, something unreadable behind her soft smiles and measured words. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife, graceful, supportive, untouchable. But perfection, like silence, often hid the loudest truths. Then there was Maxwell Clifford, David's lawyer, his confidant, the man who knew the architecture of his empire better than anyone else. Maxwell wasn't just trusted, he was indispensable. Sharp, articulate, and always 2 steps ahead in any negotiation, he had earned his place not just in David's business world, but within the walls of his home. Too close to the walls. And then, there was Margaret. At 32, Margaret was the kind of presence people rarely noticed until they needed something. A quiet, efficient woman who moved through the mansion with practiced ease, her eyes always observant, her steps always careful. She had learned early that in houses like this, invisibility was survival. But invisibility came with a cost. You saw everything. And sometimes you heard too much. It was a Tuesday evening when the air inside the mansion shifted. David had left earlier that afternoon for a last-minute business trip. Something urgent, something he insisted couldn't wait. Helena had seen him off with a gentle smile and a kiss that lingered just long enough to feel real. By nightfall, the house felt different. Too quiet. Margaret noticed it first. She was in the hallway outside the West Wing, finishing up her routine, when she heard something unusual, a low murmur coming from the private lounge. That room was rarely used unless David was entertaining high-profile guests. But David wasn't home. She paused. At first, she told herself to keep walking. It wasn't her place. It never was. Then she heard a laugh. Soft. Familiar. Helena. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly around the cloth in her hand. A second voice followed. Deeper, controlled, unmistakable. Maxwell. That alone was enough to stop her. Lawyers didn't visit at night. Not like this. Not when the house was supposed to be still. Something wasn't right. Drawn by a quiet instinct she couldn't explain, Margaret moved closer, her steps light, almost silent against the polished floor. The door to the lounge wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar, enough for voices to slip through. She didn't mean to listen, but then she heard Helena say something that froze her in place. He won't see it coming. The words were calm. Too calm. Margaret's breath caught. There was a pause. Then Maxwell's voice lowered this time. We have to be precise. If anything goes wrong, everything collapses. Silence followed. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that presses against your chest, and makes you aware that you've stepped into something you can't walk away from. Margaret's heart began to pound. She knew she should leave. Right then, before she heard anything else. Before she became part of something she didn't understand. But her feet refused to move. Inside the room, Helena's voice came again, soft, almost affectionate. Once it's done, everything belongs to us. Everything. Margaret felt a chill crawl up her spine. She didn't need to hear the rest. Because somehow she already knew. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something far worse. In that moment, standing in the shadow of a half-open door, Margaret realized something that would change everything. Some secrets aren't meant to be discovered. And some truths come with consequences. She slowly stepped back, her heart racing, her mind struggling to catch up with what she had just heard. Behind her, the mansion remained silent, unaware, unchanged, but not for long, because somewhere inside those walls, a plan had already been set in motion. And now, someone else knew. Margaret didn't sleep that night. The mansion was quiet again, as if nothing had happened, as if the walls hadn't absorbed every word spoken in that dimly lit lounge. But Margaret knew better. Silence in a house like this wasn't peace, it was concealment. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the voices in her mind. He won't see it coming. Once it's done, everything belongs to us. Her chest tightened. There was no misunderstanding what she had heard. Helena and Maxwell weren't just crossing a line. They were planning something irreversible. And the he could only be one person. David Wellington. Morning came with its usual routine, but nothing felt usual anymore. Margaret moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast, her hands steady, her expression calm. But inside, her thoughts raced. She had worked in the Wellington estate long enough to understand one thing. Powerful people didn't forgive loose ends. And right now, she was one. Helena entered the kitchen just after 8 a.m., graceful as always, dressed in soft morning elegance. She smiled faintly. "Good morning, Margaret." "Good morning, ma'am," Margaret replied, keeping her voice even. Their eyes met for a brief second. And in that moment, Margaret felt something shift. Was it suspicion? Or was it just her imagination? Helena walked past her casually, pouring herself tea as if the night before had never happened. No tension, no sign of guilt, just calm, controlled normalcy. It was unsettling. Later that afternoon, Maxwell arrived. Not through the front entrance, but the side. Margaret noticed from the hallway mirror as she dusted a nearby table. He moved quickly, confidently, as though he had every right to be there, even when David was miles away. Their timing was precise. Too precise. Margaret kept her distance, but her awareness sharpened. Every movement, every sound, every door opening and closing, it all meant something now. She wasn't just cleaning anymore. She was watching. By evening, one thing became clear. This wasn't a one-time conversation. This was a plan in motion. And plans like this didn't wait. Margaret stood by the window in her small quarters, staring out at the fading light. She had a choice to make. Stay silent and protect herself, or speak up and risk everything. Her heart pounded at the thought, because deep down, she knew something chilling. If Helena and Maxwell were capable of planning David's downfall, what would they do to someone who knew the truth? The next few days passed with a strange, calculated rhythm. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was obvious. And that was what made it terrifying. Margaret began to notice patterns, small things at first. Helena spending more time on private calls, always stepping away, her voice lowered just enough to keep words from carrying. Maxwell's visits became more frequent, always timed when the house felt empty, when no one important was expected to interrupt. It was no longer suspicion. It was confirmation. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the tall windows, Margaret found herself once again near the west wing. Not by accident this time, but by instinct. The lounge door was closed, but not completely. A thin line of light spilled into the hallway, and voices followed. "The documents are ready," Maxwell was saying. "Once he signs, everything transfers smoothly." Margaret's breath slowed as she leaned ever so slightly closer. "Will he question it?" Helena asked. A pause, then a quiet chuckle. "He trusts me, and he trusts you even more." Those words landed heavily. Trust. The very thing they were using against him. Margaret's pulse quickened. Documents? Transfer? This wasn't just about eliminating David physically. It was about taking everything he owned before he even realized what was happening. Inside, Helena's tone shifted, softer but colder. And after that, Maxwell didn't hesitate. There's a window. During your trip. No suspicion, no noise. It will look natural. Natural. Margaret felt a chill run through her entire body. They had thought this through. Every step. Every detail. She stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound. Her mind raced, piecing it all together like a puzzle she wished she had never started solving. First, the paperwork. Then, the timing. Then, David disappears. And no one would question it. Because everything would already belong to Helena. That night, Margaret locked her door for the first time since she started working at the estate. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat on the edge of her bed. This was bigger than she imagined. Far bigger. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a perfectly constructed trap. And David Wellington was walking straight into it, blind. Margaret stared at her phone, the weight of her next decision pressing heavily on her chest. Should she warn him? Could she even reach him? And if she did, would he believe her? Or worse, would it expose her? Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the windows like a quiet warning. Time was running out. And somewhere, far from the mansion, a man who believed his world was secure had no idea that everything he owned, and his life, were already being signed away. Margaret held her phone in both hands, staring at David Wellington's contact as if it might disappear if she blinked. She had never called him directly before. That wasn't her place. In this house, there were lines, and she had always respected them. But now, those lines meant nothing. Because if she stayed silent, a man would lose everything. Maybe even his life. Her thumb hovered over the call button, then stopped. A new thought crept in. What if they're watching? The idea sent a chill through her. Helena was careful. Maxwell was calculated. If they could plan something this precise, then monitoring the house, calls, movements, even staff, wouldn't be beyond them. Margaret slowly lowered the phone. No, calling from inside the mansion was too dangerous. She needed to be smarter. The next morning, she kept her routine unchanged. Breakfast, cleaning, quiet movements through familiar halls. But inside, she was preparing, waiting, watching for the right moment. By midday, Helena had left for an appointment, and the house fell into a rare stillness. No visitors, no footsteps, no voices. This was her chance. Margaret moved quickly but calmly, slipping out through the back entrance. Her heart pounded with every step as she walked further away from the estate, putting distance between herself and the walls that held too many secrets. A few blocks down, she found a small cafe. Quiet, unremarkable, safe. She sat in the far corner, her hands still slightly trembling as she pulled out her phone again. This time, she didn't hesitate. The line rang once, twice. Then, David Wellington. His voice was steady, familiar, unaware. Margaret swallowed. Sir, it's Margaret. A brief pause. Margaret, is everything all right? That question alone made her chest tighten. Everything was far from all right. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Sir, I don't have much time, but you need to be careful. There are things happening in the house, things you don't know about. Silence. Not confusion. Not dismissal. But attention. Go on, David said, his tone sharpening. Margaret glanced around the cafe instinctively. Then she said it. I believe someone is planning something against you. On the other end, the silence stretched longer this time. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question her immediately, and that worried her even more. Because it meant he was thinking, calculating. Who? David finally asked. Margaret hesitated. This was the point of no return. Once she said their names, there was no going back. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Your wife and Mr. Maxwell. The air between them changed instantly. Heavy, dangerous, unreal. You're certain? He asked quietly. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief second. I heard them, sir. More than once. They're planning something, involving your assets and your absence. She didn't say the word, but they both understood it. Another pause. Then David spoke again, calm, controlled, but different. I need you to act like nothing has changed. Say nothing. Do nothing unusual. Can you do that? Margaret nodded instinctively, even though he couldn't see her. Yes, sir. Good, he replied. And Margaret. She held her breath. You did the right thing. The call ended. But the wait didn't. Margaret sat there, staring at her phone, her heart still racing. She had done it. She had crossed the line. Back at the mansion later that evening, everything looked the same. Helena sat gracefully in the living room. The lights were warm, the silence familiar. But something had changed, because now 3 people knew the truth, and only 2 of them thought they were in control. When David Wellington returned, nothing seemed out of place. That was the most unsettling part. He walked through the grand entrance with his usual calm authority, his presence filling the mansion as it always had. Helena greeted him with a soft smile, her arms wrapping around him in a warm embrace that looked perfect. Too perfect. "I missed you," she said gently. David smiled. "I wasn't gone that long." But his eyes were different. Observing, measuring, watching. From a distance, Margaret noticed it immediately. He knew. Not everything, but enough. And yet, he played his role flawlessly. Dinner that evening was quiet, almost intimate. Helena spoke about her day, her voice smooth and effortless. David listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally smiling. Maxwell arrived shortly after, right on time, as if nothing had changed. "David," Maxwell greeted, extending his hand. "Maxwell," David replied, firm and composed. Their handshake lingered just a second too long. A silent exchange, a test neither acknowledged aloud. "I brought the documents we discussed," Maxwell added, placing a slim leather folder on the table. Margaret, standing just outside the dining area, felt her chest tighten. The documents. This was it. David glanced at the folder briefly, then leaned back in his chair. "Perfect timing," he said. "I was just about to review some things." Helena's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, almost unnoticeable, but Margaret saw it. The room felt heavier now. Every word carried weight. Every glance meant something. David opened the folder slowly, flipping through the pages with deliberate calm. His expression remained neutral, unreadable. But inside, he was already several steps ahead. Because earlier that day, before stepping foot back into his home, David had made a call. Not to Maxwell, not to Helena, but to someone else. Someone who specialized in uncovering what people tried hardest to hide. Back in the dining room, David closed the folder. "This looks thorough," he said casually. Maxwell smiled slightly. "As always. And I trust everything is in order?" "Of course." A pause. Then David nodded. "Good. I'll sign it soon." Helena's lips curved into a soft smile, but her eyes held something sharper. Anticipation. Across the room, Margaret felt a quiet unease settle in. Something wasn't right. Yes, David knew. Yes, he was playing along. But Helena and Maxwell were confident. Too confident. Later that night, as the house grew quiet again, David stood alone in his study, the city lights reflecting faintly through the glass windows. His phone buzzed. A message. Short. Direct. "Everything is in place. They won't see it coming." David's jaw tightened slightly, a cold realization settling in. This was no longer just about defense. It was about control. Because while Helena and Maxwell believed they were setting the perfect trap, they had no idea. They were already standing inside one. The morning light filtered softly through the mansion's tall windows, but the warmth it should have brought felt hollow. David moved deliberately through the halls, each step measured, each breath controlled. Margaret followed silently, sensing the tension that neither Helena nor Maxwell dared to reveal. Helena appeared in the library doorway, her expression composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "David, are you ready for the meeting?" she asked, voice smooth yet carrying an edge. "Always," he replied, closing the folder he had left on the table the night before. "Shall we begin?" Maxwell was already waiting, leaning against the polished oak table, the same confident smirk in place. But today, it looked slightly forced, as if the veneer of control was cracking. David pulled out a chair and sat, calm, unhurried. "I reviewed the documents last night," he said softly. "Very thorough work, almost too thorough." Helena's smile faltered. Maxwell's eyes flicked toward her briefly. "I'm not sure I follow," Maxwell said cautiously. David's gaze sharpened. "It's simple. You've been careful, hiding your moves, your intentions. But every action leaves a trace. Even the best-laid plans." A chill seemed to fill the room. Helena's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Margaret watched, holding her breath. This was the moment she had sensed for days. The shift in power, subtle yet undeniable. David leaned forward, opening the folder once more. Inside, he had marked inconsistencies, gaps in their timeline, traces of attempts to manipulate evidence. Looks like someone did their homework, Maxwell muttered, finally breaking his composure. David's lips curved into a faint smile. Not someone. I did. And now, the real question. How do you plan to recover from this? Helena's face went pale. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Their confidence, so carefully cultivated, was crumbling. Margaret stepped closer, feeling the electric charge in the air. For the first time, she understood the truth fully. David hadn't just anticipated their trap. He had anticipated their anticipation. And while you've been busy planning my downfall, David continued, voice calm but lethal, I've already taken measures to ensure the outcome you expected will never happen. The silence that followed was deafening. At that moment, the tables had turned completely. Helena and Maxwell realized, far too late, that they had underestimated him. And in the quiet corners of the mansion, Margaret could almost hear the traps snapping shut around them, exactly as David had intended. The mansion felt smaller now, the walls almost pressing in. Helena's calm facade had vanished entirely, replaced by tension that tightened her every movement. Maxwell stood rigid, eyes darting between David and the folders that now seemed like instruments of doom. David rose slowly, each movement deliberate. It's over, he said softly, but every word cut sharper than any blade. Every move you made, every whisper, every plan. I've accounted for it. Helena opened her mouth, searching for a retort, but no words came. Maxwell shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that their meticulous plotting had been anticipated at every turn. Margaret watched, a mix of awe and relief flooding her senses. She had feared this moment might never come, but here it was. Justice, cunning, and control returned to the one who truly deserved it. David walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. You thought you were the hunters, he said, almost to himself. But in the end, you were prey. The silence was thick. Then, with a subtle gesture, he handed Margaret a small, unassuming envelope. Everything you need, he said, nodding. Helena's voice finally broke the quiet, trembling. How did you know? David turned, his eyes calm, almost pitying. Because I never underestimated you. But I also never underestimated myself. Maxwell's shoulders slumped. The power they had wielded so confidently was gone, evaporated under the weight of strategy and foresight. Margaret stepped forward, feeling the tension release in a subtle exhale. The danger had passed. The trap that had seemed so inevitable had been turned against its architects. David's gaze lingered on Helena and Maxwell, not with anger, but with quiet finality. Learn from this, he said, voice steady. Next time, think twice before trying to control a game you don't fully understand. And then he turned, leaving the room, and the chaos they had created behind. In the halls of the mansion, a new order settled. Margaret felt it deeply. The true strength had always been foresight, patience, and the courage to act when the moment arrived. The trap had closed. The game was finished. And David Wellington had won. If this story had you holding your breath, make sure your friends hear it too. Like, subscribe, and share. Your next favorite twist is just a click away.